The morning they buried my wife, my son-in-law called me from the parking lot of the funeral home and said, "Don't go home after this. I found something in Miriam's desk. Come to my office first. And don't tell your daughter I called you." Then he lowered his voice and added, "She doesn't know yet, but you might be in danger, Hugh." I almost dropped the phone. I was standing in the coat room of St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Barrie, Ontario, still wearing the black tie Miriam had bought me for her sister's wedding 12 years ago. The tie still smelled faintly of the cedar chest where she kept it pressed flat between layers of tissue paper. I had not eaten since the previous morning. My knees ached from the cold that had settled into the church's stone floor, and my son-in-law was telling me I might be in danger on the day I buried my wife of 41 years. But before I tell you what he found in that desk, you need to understand how the morning of Miriam's funeral became the day my own daughter looked at me like I was a problem she needed to solve. My name is Hugh Mercer. I am 69 years old. I spent 34 years as a letter carrier for Canada Post in Barrie, walking the same routes in every kind of weather this country can throw at a man. Before that, I did 2 years of trades at Georgian College and spent a decade doing rough carpentry on new builds across Simcoe County. I am not a complicated man. I fixed things with my hands, and I paid my taxes, and I loved my wife in the quiet, daily way that doesn't make for good stories until it ends. Miriam passed on a Thursday in late November. The hospital said it was cardiac arrest. She had a condition, a structural thing with one of her valves that we had been managing for 6 years, with medication and regular appointments at the Royal Victoria. She was 67 years old. She was not young, but she was not ready. She had a quilting project, half finished on the frame in the spare bedroom. She had library books with bookmarks in them. She had a jar of peanut butter open on the counter. People who are ready don't leave open jars of peanut butter. The church was full. Miriam had lived in Barrie her whole life, except for the 3 years she worked in Thunder Bay after college. People came who I hadn't seen since our son's minor hockey days. The minister did a good service, honest and not too long. Miriam would have approved. She had no patience for ceremony that went past its welcome. My daughter Cassandra sat in the front pew beside me. She was 41, and she had her mother's eyes and her mother's chin, and none of her mother's patience. She sat with her back very straight, and her phone face down on her knee. I watched her turn it over twice to check the screen and turn it back. Her husband Adrian sat on her other side. He was wearing a dark suit that fit well, and he kept his eyes forward and his hands folded. He did not look at his phone. He looked at the casket. They had driven up from Toronto the night before. Cassandra had let herself into the house with the key Miriam had given her years ago, and when I came downstairs at 6 in the morning, she was already at the kitchen table with a notepad and a pen. She said she was making a list of things that needed to be handled. I poured myself a coffee and asked her what kinds of things. She said, "Estate things, Dad, financial things. It would be better if we sat down with someone at the bank soon." I nodded and drank my coffee and looked out the window at the gray November sky. After the service, we drove in a small procession to the crematorium on Ferndale Drive. Miriam had been clear about that. No burial. She wanted to be scattered somewhere she had loved, but she had not written it down, so I would have to decide. That was a thought I could not hold for very long yet. We came back to the house for the reception. The church ladies had organized it, and there was more food than anyone needed, the way there always is when a community grieves properly. Butter tarts and Nanaimo bars, and a whole ham and casseroles with their names taped on the lids in masking tape. The house smelled warm and full and deeply wrong without Miriam in it. I sat in my chair in the living room and accepted handshakes and kind words for an hour. Cassandra moved through the rooms in a purposeful way, refilling things, directing people, doing the work of a woman who is managing her feelings through logistics. I recognized it. I did not judge it. People grieve the way they know how. It was near the end, when the last of the neighbors were putting on their coats, that Cassandra sat on the arm of the sofa across from me and said, "Dad, I need to talk to you about the house." I looked at her. "I've been going through some of Mum's paperwork," she said, "just to get a sense of where things stand. I think it would make more sense for you to move closer to us. There's that new seniors community in Mississauga, Lakeview Terrace. It's very well run. You'd have people your own age. You wouldn't have to worry about the furnace or the driveway." I said, Your mother just died this morning, Cassandra. She pressed her lips together. I know, but these things take time to arrange, and I don't want you to be stuck up here alone, through the winter, struggling with everything. I said, I'm not struggling. Adrian appeared in the doorway then, and he and Cassandra exchanged a look that went on a second too long. I noticed it. I filed it away the way you file away small things that don't make sense yet. After everyone had gone home and Cassandra and Adrian were upstairs in the guest room, I sat alone in the kitchen with the lights low and drank a cup of tea I didn't want. That's when my phone buzzed on the table. Adrian's name on the screen. I stared at it for a moment before answering. He spoke quietly, almost in a whisper. He said he had found something in Miriam's desk while he was helping carry boxes to the car. A small locked cash box that had been pushed to the back of the bottom drawer. He had recognized the type because his mother had used the same kind. He hadn't mentioned it to Cassandra. He said, Hugh, I think you need to see what's in it before anyone else does. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Don't tell her I called. I asked him what he meant by danger. He paused for a long time, long enough that I could hear him breathing. I think Miriam was afraid of something, he said, and I think it had to do with Cassandra. I hung up the phone and sat in the kitchen of my own house in the dark and tried to understand what my world had become in the space of a single week. I drove to Adrian's office the next morning. He worked as an insurance adjuster in an old building on Dunlop Street East, the kind of office with frosted glass and a coat rack by the door and the smell of instant coffee permanently in the carpet. He was waiting for me. His secretary wasn't in yet. He locked the door behind me. He set the cash box on his desk. It was gray metal with a small combination lock, the 4-digit kind you can buy at any Canadian Tire. He said Miriam had scratched a series of numbers on the inside of a picture frame in the kitchen, the one with the photo of our first house. He said he noticed it only because he had helped Miriam hang that frame years ago, and he remembered the back of it. He had used the numbers on the lock. It opened. Inside was a small notebook, the kind with a black cover and a red elastic, and underneath it, a USB drive in a clear plastic sleeve. He slid the notebook across the desk to me. Miriam's handwriting, neat, left slanting letters with the occasional underline when she was being emphatic. I had read 40 years of her grocery lists and birthday cards and notes left on the kitchen counter. I would know her handwriting anywhere. I opened it to the first page and began to read. She had started writing in it 8 months before she died. The first few entries were brief, almost matter-of-fact, a withdrawal from their joint savings, amounts and dates, items she had not authorized. She had cross-referenced them against her bank app, and she had noted the account they'd transferred to. Cassandra's name appeared in the first entry. I kept reading. Over 6 months, $43,000 had moved out of the savings account Miriam and I kept at Meridian Credit Union, the account that held my pension supplement and the money we had set aside for the roof. Miriam had discovered it when she went to make a transfer to cover our property tax and found the balance $5,000 lower than it should have been. She had investigated quietly. She had matched dates to phone calls. She had noted that Cassandra had asked for Miriam's login to check something the previous spring, when we had some trouble with the online banking interface, and Miriam had given it to her. She had not given her permission to move the money. Toward the back of the notebook, the handwriting changed. It got smaller. The letters pressed harder into the page. Miriam wrote that she had confronted Cassandra in September, on the phone, alone, while I was at my Thursday walking group. She wrote that Cassandra had cried and said it was temporary, that she and Adrian were in financial difficulty. She had intended to pay it back before we noticed. And please, please don't tell Dad. It will devastate him. He doesn't need this on top of everything. And then Miriam wrote 4 words that stopped my breath. She said I was afraid. Not afraid that Cassandra had stolen from us. She already knew that. She was afraid because of what Cassandra said next, after she promised to pay it back. She said, Mom, you need to change your will. You need to put the house in my name now. While you're still healthy enough to do it properly, it will make things so much easier when the time comes, Miriam wrote. She said when the time comes, and I felt cold. I closed the notebook. Adrian was watching me from across the desk. He had not said a word since he handed it to me. He was a decent man. I had not always given him enough credit for that. I asked him about the USB drive. He said he hadn't looked at it yet. He thought I should see it first. I drove home with the notebook in my jacket pocket and the USB drive in my glove compartment. My hands were steady on the wheel, which surprised me. I felt very far away from myself, the way you feel when you're very tired or when a piece of news is too large for your body to process all at once. Miriam had known. She had known for months, and she had carried it alone to protect me, the same way she always did. I thought about the times she had seemed tired in those last months. I had thought it was the medication. I thought about the evening in October when I found her at the kitchen table, with her reading glasses on and her calculator out, and she told me she was just double-checking the household budget. I thought about how she had hugged me that night when we went to bed, longer than usual, with her face pressed into the side of my neck. I should have asked more questions. I had been trained for 40 years to notice things at the end of a route, a step left down, a dog behind a gate, a package too heavy for the step, and I had missed this in my own house. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop at the kitchen table. There were 3 files, a spreadsheet with dates, account numbers, and amounts, more detailed than the notebook, going back further, a scan of a letter, handwritten, which Miriam appeared to have drafted but perhaps never sent, and an audio file. I opened the audio file last. It was a phone call recording. Miriam had done it from her phone, just held it to the speaker while the call played out. The quality was imperfect but clear enough. Cassandra's voice, "Mum, I told you, it's being handled. Miriam, I want you to put the money back, Cassandra. All of it. Your father works hard for that money. Cassandra, he's retired. He doesn't work for anything anymore." A silence. Cassandra again. "Look, Mum, you know Dad can't manage on his own. You've said it yourself. He forgets appointments. He gets confused about the bills. When you're gone, Miriam, when I'm gone." Cassandra, "I'm not saying anything. I'm saying when that time comes, the way things are set up, it's going to be a mess. I'm trying to protect him." Miriam, "You're trying to protect yourself." Another silence. Longer. Cassandra, her voice different now, lower, with an edge I had never heard in my daughter before. "Mum, I need you to think very carefully about what you want the next few years to look like for Dad. The house is too big for him. He can't do the stairs forever. There are options, good options, but they require some planning, and they require your cooperation." The call ended there. I sat at the kitchen table for a very long time. I did not call Cassandra. I did not call Adrian. I called my old friend and former walking group regular who happened to have spent 30 years as a paralegal before she retired, a woman named Eugenie Marsh, who lived on the other side of the city and who had played cards with Miriam every second Tuesday for 11 years. I told her I needed to talk to someone, and I couldn't tell her why on the phone. She was at my door in 40 minutes with a thermos of coffee and the face of a woman prepared for serious conversation. I showed her the notebook and the files. She read slowly and completely, and she did not speak until she had finished. Then she said, "Hugh, you know what this means." I said I was beginning to. She said the financial transfers were potentially criminal. Fraud, unauthorized use of account credentials, possibly breach of trust. She said the recording, depending on how it was obtained, might or might not be admissible but was certainly significant. She said I needed a lawyer, not tomorrow, today. I said, "She's my daughter." Eugenie looked at me the way Miriam used to when I was being deliberately slow about something. She said, "She was planning to put you in a home, Hugh, and she moved $43,000 out of your account without asking. Those are not the actions of a daughter. Those are the actions of someone who has already decided you don't matter." I drove to a lawyer's office that afternoon. His name was Theodore Brandt, a family and estates lawyer on Collier Street, who had been recommended to me by a colleague of Eugenie's. He was a quiet man in his early 50s with reading glasses on a chain and the careful way of speaking that comes from years of delivering complicated information to people who don't want to hear it. I gave him the notebook, the spreadsheet, and the audio file. He reviewed them while I sat across from him. He asked me several questions. He was not dramatic about it. He was methodical, the way a good tradesman is methodical. At the end he said, "You have a real situation here, Mr. Mercer. The financial transfers alone would support a police complaint and a civil suit. But I'd like to ask you something first. What is it you want from this? Do you want your money back? Do you want accountability? Or do you want something else entirely?" I thought about it honestly. I said, I want to understand what I'm dealing with before I make any moves." He nodded. He said there was a lot I could do quietly before anything became official. He said the first thing was to secure the assets, change the account credentials, and alert the credit union, which we would do immediately. The second thing was to wait. He explained what waiting would accomplish. Cassandra did not know I had found the notebook. She did not know Adrian had given it to me. She believed she was in a position of advantage, and people in that position, he said, have a tendency to confirm it. I drove home and changed every password we had. I called Meridian and spoke to the branch manager, a woman I had known for 12 years, and I explained that I had reason to believe our account credentials had been compromised and I needed a full audit. She called me back within 2 hours with a complete transaction history, $47,200. More than the notebook showed. There were 2 transfers I had not found yet, smaller ones, from the fall before Miriam started keeping records. I sat with that number for a while. 3 days after the funeral, Cassandra and Adrian drove back up from Toronto. They said they wanted to check in on me. Cassandra walked through the house the way a person walks through a property they already own in their head, running her hand along the doorframe of the spare bedroom, pausing in the kitchen to look at the counter space, standing in the driveway and looking up at the eaves. She came inside and sat at the kitchen table and told me she had been doing some research on Lakeview Terrace. She had spoken to the admissions coordinator. She said there was a unit available, ground floor, south-facing, and the wait list was short. She said she could come up next weekend and we could start going through things, decide what to keep, arrange for donations. I poured her a cup of tea. I sat down across from her. I said, "Cassandra, tell me about the transfers." She didn't move. Her hands were wrapped around the mug and they didn't move, and neither did her face, not for a long beat. Then she said, "What transfers?" I said, "From the Meridian account. $47,000 over 8 months. She put the mug down. She said, "Dad, I was going to tell you. I've been meaning to tell you. I was going to pay it back." I said, "When?" She said, "When things settled down with us financially. Adrian's company had a bad year. We had some debt. I panicked. I know it was wrong. I should have asked you. I should have come to you and asked." I said, "You used your mother's login." She said, "She gave it to me." I said, "She gave it to you to check an interface problem, not to move money." Her jaw tightened. She looked at the table. She said, "Dad, I understand you're upset, but right now what matters is that you're taken care of. That's all I want. I just want to make sure you're okay." I said, "Play it for her." Adrian had been standing in the doorway of the kitchen. He reached into his jacket pocket and put his phone on the table and pressed play. Cassandra's voice came out of the small speaker, thin but recognizable. When the line came about, "When that time comes," she closed her eyes. When it ended, the kitchen was very quiet. She looked at me and her face had changed. The managing, organized expression was gone. What was underneath it was not what I expected. It was not anger. It was something smaller and more frightened. She said, "I didn't mean it the way it sounds." I said, "I know exactly how it sounds. So does your mother." She wrote it down. Cassandra put her head in her hands. I sat across from her, and I felt something that surprised me. Not rage, not even grief, not exactly. A deep, heavy tiredness. The kind that comes when you have been suspicious of something for a long time, and then the suspicion becomes a fact, and you realize you had already been carrying the weight of it without knowing. I said, "I have spoken to a lawyer. I have spoken to the credit union. I have copies of everything. What happens next is up to you." She looked up. Her eyes were red. She said, "Dad, please, we're family." I said, "You called me a man who forgets appointments and can't manage his own bills on a recording. To your mother." She flinched. I said, "You were going to put me in a facility and take this house. And you started moving the money before Miriam was gone, which means you were planning before she died." Adrian left the room. I heard the front door open and then close quietly. Cassandra sat with her hands flat on the table. She said, very quietly, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "I want the $47,200 returned to the account within 30 days. I want the account access removed permanently. I want a signed document from you and Adrian acknowledging what happened, which my lawyer will prepare. And I want you to understand that if that money is not returned, I will file a police complaint and pursue the civil matter, and everything in that notebook and on that drive becomes part of the public record. She stared at me. She said, "You'd do that? To your own daughter?" I said, "Your mother asked me to do this, Cassandra. She left me the notebook. She left me the recording. She knew she might not be here to do it herself. I'm doing what she asked." Cassandra put her face in her hands and cried, the kind of crying that a person does when they are caught completely and have no performance left in them. I watched her and I felt sorry for her in the way you feel sorry for something that has gone very wrong, without it changing what needed to happen. I said, "Go home, talk to Adrian. Call Theodore Brandt's office on Monday." She left. I heard the car back out of the driveway. I sat in the kitchen for a long time in the quiet. The following weeks were not easy. There is nothing neat about what happened. Theodore handled the legal side with precision, and Cassandra and Adrian retained their own lawyer, which I had expected. The money came back in 2 payments, the second one right at the 30-day mark. The agreement was signed. It was not warm. It was not a reconciliation. It was a transaction, which is what it had become. I did not file the police complaint. Theodore counseled me that I had grounds, but that the civil recovery was complete, and a criminal proceeding would extend the process for years. I made the decision Miriam would have made. I chose to be finished with it rather than write. I did not speak to Cassandra for nearly 3 months. She sent a card at Christmas, and I sent one back. That was all. In January, I called Eugenie and asked if she wanted to resume the Thursday walking group. She said she had been waiting for me to ask. We walked a circuit around Sunnydale Park in the kind of cold that burns your face and clears your head. We didn't talk about Cassandra. We talked about Miriam, stories I had not told anyone yet, the small, funny private ones, the kind that feel too personal to say out loud at a funeral, but too important to let disappear. I had Miriam's ashes. I had been keeping them in the cedar chest in the bedroom, beside the quilt she had been working on. I had not been ready to scatter them because I had not known where. She had not told me in words, but she had left enough traces. There was a lake she had talked about since we were first married, a place her family had gone when she was young, called Grundy Lake in the provincial park up past Parry Sound. She had a photograph of it. She kept in her bedside drawer, a faded color photo from the 70s, with a birch tree in the foreground and the lake going silver in the late afternoon light. She had shown it to me once, years ago, and said, "That's the most peaceful place I've ever been." In May, when the roads were clear and the park had opened for the season, I drove north with Eugenie and Miriam's ashes and a thermos of tea. We found a spot on the north shore of the lake where the birch trees came down to the water. The lake was that particular shade of northern Ontario gray-blue that you only get on certain mornings, still enough to see the trees reflected in it. I opened the canister. I didn't make a speech. Miriam had no patience for speeches. I said, "Here you go, love," and I scattered her ashes across the water and watched them settle. Eugenie stood beside me and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. We drove home in the afternoon and stopped at a diner outside Parry Sound and had soup and pie and talked about ordinary things. The kind of afternoon Miriam would have liked. I went back to the house and I walked through it differently than I had since she died. I looked at the unfinished quilt and I thought about whether I might learn to finish it. I looked at the library books still on the nightstand, and I thought about reading them myself. I looked at the open jar of peanut butter still on the counter, which I had not been able to bring myself to throw away, and I finally closed the lid and put it in the pantry. The house on Greenfield Avenue, which Cassandra had wanted to sell out from under me, is still mine. The property tax is paid. The furnace runs. The driveway got plowed all winter because my neighbor's son did it without being asked. The way people in this part of the country quietly look after each other. In the spring, I started volunteering with an organization in Barrie that provides legal referrals to seniors dealing with financial exploitation. I had not known it existed until Theodore mentioned it. They were understaffed and grateful for anything. I sit with people on Wednesday afternoons and listen to what has happened to them and help them find the right words to explain it to someone who can help. Most of them are embarrassed. Most of them waited too long. Most of them say the same thing. I didn't think my family would do this. I tell them what Miriam taught me without meaning to. The people who love you the way love is supposed to work don't need access to your accounts. They don't need your property put in their name. They don't need you relocated somewhere. They can manage you more easily. They sit with you in the hard times, and they let you grieve, and they show up with coffee, and they walk beside you in the cold. If someone who calls themselves family is doing the other thing, that matters. It matters more than the embarrassment of naming it. Miriam knew that. She put it in a notebook and locked it in a box and left it where a decent man might find it. I think about her every day. I think about the 41 years and the butter tarts and the library books and the quilt and the Paris fun jar she kept on the windowsill over the kitchen sink, the one we never emptied far enough to take the trip. I took the money out of it before I left for Grundy Lake. I counted it. $42.75 in loonies and toonies and quarters saved over I don't know how many years. I used it to buy 2 pieces of butter tart pie at that diner outside Parry Sound. One for me and one for Eugenie, and I told her who it was from, and she held up her coffee cup and said, "To Miriam, to Miriam." She earned every last coin.